Good morning and welcome to the joint meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners and the Lane County Board of Public Health. It is Wednesday, April 21st, 2021. Before we begin our meeting, there's opportunity for public comments. I will remind audience members that you are currently registered in this meeting system as attendees. Attendees are webinar participants who are audience members viewing the meeting. Your microphone and webcam are automatically muted as attendees. There will be a time now that is open for public comment. If you wish to participate, I will ask you to raise your virtual hand to be recognized. You should see a hand icon on the device you are using to watch the meeting. Press once to raise your hand. When public comment begins, Diana will call names. When your name is called, you will be unmuted and provided 3 minutes to make your public comment. When that time is up, or you are through earlier than that, you will return to muted status and the next name will be called. You can continue watching the webinar as long as you choose. The intent is for everyone to be able to make a public comment that wishes to do so. And at this time, Diana, do we have anyone that you can see that would like to make any comments to the board?
Thank you, Chair Bernie. I do see we have 6 attendees registered at this time. If you would like to speak during public comment, please raise your virtual hand and please press the button only once, and I will call upon you to begin your public comment. I do see, right now I will be calling upon Matthew Yuke. I apologize if I did not get your name right. Matthew, I will unmute you and start the timer and you may begin your public comment. Matthew, I show you are self-muted. There you go.
Hi, County Commissioners. My name is Matthew Yuke. Thank you for serving. I'm here today to speak in support of the declaration to declare racism a public health crisis, especially as highlighted under this COVID-19 pandemic. Looking at the vaccination rates even rolled out in Lane County, despite the best efforts, which I applaud y'all for, applaud Lane County Health and partners that you reached out into the community to make this happen, definitely show that there's a gap that this resolution, I hope, will help fix. Along those lines, I've been looking at some of the bias, hate, and discrimination reporting in Eugene and notice that there's definitely a gap I see that I think Lane County could help facilitate. One way is looking at Lane Education School District. While I understand it's a school district, it's still part of that structure I feel that could benefit from having more affinity organizers. There's one already for Black students and residents of Eugene and Lane County, which is phenomenal, just because of systemic racism and centuries of oppression. But getting that to branch out more, especially in these times of heightened ADPI hate and discrimination, where unfortunately the EP statement trying to provide solace to the ADPI community said that it's nothing to worry about here. There have been no reports of hate and discrimination. And I do not find that at all true, personally. But the fact that they didn't say that they need to look at why there might be this underreporting of something that is definitely on the uptick is something I also could see as doing a full linguistic impact through LESD to help give Eugene a better idea of limited English proficiency households. So that way we could help keep pushing the revolutionary work almost. I mean, the needed fundamental work that Fabio Andrade is already rocking in the HRC that needs more support. And so looking at even translating materials into simplified Chinese, which seems to exceed that Executive Order 23266 Safe Harbor quota for needing that translation, is something I implore you all to help with. Oh my gosh, I think that was pretty much it. Thank you very much for considering this and for considering good ways to use these resources. I really hope that we can take a better system-wide approach and angle with some of the inequities that COVID-19 has unfortunately highlighted, and look forward to seeing the work and helping as much as I can to making sure this happens equitably. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker will be Martin Allums, followed by Emily Little. Martin, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your testimony.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Well, hello, commissioners. My name is Martin Allums. I'm representing the community today. I just want to thank you for all the work that you've been doing, and thank you for the time that you've taken today to listen to our comments. I appreciate that. I'm going to keep things as direct as I possibly can. I appreciate, the space that you all created to discuss, declaring racism as a public health issue, because it's something that's very, very important, particularly when you're looking at mental health and health system utilization. Many Black Americans suffer from health disparities and access barriers related to mental health and behavioral health care. And that access to quality healthcare has been an issue affecting the community for decades. We've experienced redlining, lack of economic resources for growth and development for the communities. And so these communities lack resources like pharmacies, urgent cares, and prenatal and mental health clinics. These communities don't necessarily have the tools to advocate for these resources, at the systemic level. And, the people who are left behind to suffer these consequences. Back in 2008, we knew that 50 to 60% of Americans underutilize health services. And we also know that there's a significant amount of underutilization in the BIPOC community as well. And that underutilization is more significant than that 50 to 60% of Americans. These barriers include socioeconomic barriers, personal barriers, structural barriers. But for the Black community, this issue has really been tied to historic racism, and mistrust as well. When I talk to the Black community, I routinely hear, folks talk about how they don't know if they're going to receive, a good healthcare because of racism. One of the easiest ways to check and see if a community has that capacity to provide, anti-racist healthcare is to look and see if they had redlining. If they had redlining, there's a lot of studies out there that are able to show the direct effects that redlining has had on those communities, specifically in regards to access and in regards to mental health. And so, like I said before, I appreciate you all taking the time to, have this discussion. I appreciate, us moving forward with this initiative, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker will be Emily Little, followed by George Beverly. Emily, I will unmute the microphone and you may begin your public comment. Oops, doesn't want to let me, there it goes. It shows yourself muted, Emily.
Oh, can you hear me now? Perfect.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I'm also speaking in support of declaring racism a public health crisis. My name is Emily Little. I am a perinatal health researcher and the executive director of Nurturely, which is a Eugene-based nonprofit that promotes equity in perinatal wellness and strengthens cultures of support for infants and caregivers. Black and Indigenous birthing parents are 2 to 3 times more likely to die from a pregnancy-related cause than their white counterparts. And babies from communities of color are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in the immediate neonatal period than their white counterparts. This also follows with breastfeeding and lactation outcomes. Black and Indigenous infants are half as likely to be breastfed at 3 and 6 months than white infants, with one study showing Black infants being 9 times more likely to be offered formula in the hospital than white babies, which compromises human milk feeding and exacerbates disparities in the trajectory of long-term health. We also know that perinatal mood and anxiety disorders like postpartum depression are at an all-time high and are up to 40 to 80% higher in Latinx and African American communities. Data clearly show that these inequities in pregnancy, postpartum, and infant health are caused by racism, not by any confounding factors. We know that racially concordant care decreases risk of mortality for Black babies. We also know that perception of race-based discrimination is at the core of the chronic stress underlying risk of preterm birth. Similarly, the environmental racism experienced by communities of color exacerbates existing perinatal health problems by increasing risk of preterm birth and stillbirth caused by air pollution and temperature rise. Nurturely recently led a 6-week training for 350 Oregon health professionals on racism in perinatal and pediatric health. We're also supporting the efforts of the Eugene Springfield NAACP Health Committee in launching a 4-week series to decrease bias and increase patient-centered, culturally responsive care. But in combination with these trainings, Nurturely believes that declaring racism as a public health crisis is a small but absolutely necessary, absolutely non-negotiable step in the right direction to reduce these inequities for birthing people and their babies. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker is George Beverly. George, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. George, I do show you are self-muted.
Okay, can you hear me
There
now?
you go. Yes.
Good morning, commissioners and everyone on the line. I just want to say my name is George Beverly. I'm from Blue River, and I am a equity and access co-chair member for Lane County. And this is really important to me because race is a systemic problem, not only in the state of Oregon, but also nationally and around the world. And so I just thank you guys for having the space to talk about this and even putting a resolution ordinance to something so important as far as health care for health service care for Black and brown people. So I just thank you and have a good day.
Thank you for your public comment. At this time, I do not show any other hands raised. If you, oh, Eric Richardson, I just saw your hand go up. Eric, I will reset the timer. I will unmute the microphone and you may begin your public comment. Eric, I do show yourself muted.
Mute there. All right, is that better?
There you go.
All righty. Commissioners, thank you all. Joe's good to see you there in the screen. You know, this is it's a long time overdue. I come to you as a representative of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. We are an organization that has been looking at the issue of violence, racism, the rule of law for 110 years. And this declaration actually is something that was conceived and thought about when we created the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. We were already thinking about racism as a public crisis. We had just been out of a war where over 400,000 Americans died. And believe me, they thought that was a health crisis. It was a health crisis for the families, the wives, the children, and it's generational. Racism has been generational, it's affected our nation. White people are affected by racism. This is a mental health crisis, and it spills over to our education system. The decision-making process that's been used has been one without empathy for human considerations, for those who are most vulnerable. And unfortunately, it's been a hallmark of the kind of decisions we make in the West. And we've been seeking change so that the human element becomes the first consideration when we make our considerations. So we just hope that racism understanding that racism as a public health crisis is going to go a long way in healing everyone across racial bounds, because we've all been suffering with decisions and silos that keep us from one another, keep us from the growth and the excellence that we all can achieve with support from each other. And so I just commend the fact that we are even having this conversation at this level. And I think the work that the commission has done as of late, addressing these issues, has been commendable. And thank you for that. And I hope that you will support this effort as we go forward. And I also am really heartened to hear all the other support in the community. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for your public comment. At this time, I do not see any other hands raised. If anyone else would like to give public comment, please raise your hand at this time. Chair Bernie, I am not seeing any additional hands being raised, so I will return the meeting to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for those public comments. And I don't see it on the agenda. Do commissioners have an opportunity to provide remonstrance? I think we should before we tackle this item. Do any commissioners have anything they would like to state to any of those providing testimony? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. And I'd also like to offer the thanks to Dr. Warren and staff for scheduling this item today in light of my absence for next week's meeting. We pushed it forward to today, and thank you for the board for having a meeting on Wednesday, for a special meeting to accommodate this very important issue. I wanted to just mention something that Emily Little said. Ms. Little, you called this a small but absolutely necessary and irreversible step. Absolutely correct and spot on. As a necessary step, it gives us a platform to base future decisions, future action, and future support on. It's an absolute powerful platform that is irreversible. I'm looking forward to where, not what this is, but where this goes. And I would also like to say that I listened very closely to Matthew Yuke, the first in looking at vaccination rates in particular. I've heard that anecdotally, that access has been not denied, but people are reluctant in some cases to step forward and get vaccinations when they are eligible. This kind of a resolution gives us definitely an avenue to make certain that we are providing every single opportunity to offer healthcare to the people who need it in our community. There's a lot more to say about this, Chair Bernie, but I wanted to thank the people testifying this morning, and also thanks not just the people who are testifying, but the many, many people who have called, written, and offered words of support for this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And we will be speaking much more about this. It's the next item on our agenda. Are there any other commissioners that would like to speak now, however? You know what, Commissioner Trieger, are you, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, please go.
Appreciate it. As Commissioner Farr said, there's lots to say, and this is our primary item on the agenda this morning, so we'll have lots of other opportunity to weigh in. But I do want to very specifically, recognize the folks that took the time, and as I said at our session last night, appreciate not just the time to dial in this morning, but also the time it took for you to collect your thoughts and prepare your statement, and specifically to this issue and to some of our callers to recognize that in this virtual platform, in a way, it makes it easier and less stressful for folks to show up and give comment, particularly for our BIPOC, our Black, Indigenous, and people of color community members, because it can be daunting and intimidating to show up at a public meeting and give comment. Specifically, Matthew Yuke, really great to hear your voice, and to especially elevate Asian Pacific Islanders as a group that is experiencing a unique form of racism in this country. So thank you for weighing in. Martin Allums, thank you for also elevating mental health concerns as part of public health for Black folks and other people of color in our community. Emily Littles, I really appreciate you bringing in maternal and child health. For those of you that know me, you know that is a particular area of passion and commitment of mine. and really powerful and important statistics that you shared with us. George Beverly, I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you, but I'm a former member of the Equity and Access Board. And so it's great to hear from someone from that body and that you all are engaging in this work. We rely on our advisory boards to be a part of our arms out into the community to understand the experience of our community members on these issues. And finally, to Eric Richardson, thank you for your years and years of dedicated community advocacy in your various roles with the NAACP. But I particularly appreciate you bringing up that racism affects everyone, and that white people are also harmed by racism, that collectively we share a responsibility for one another's well-being. And on the ride in this morning, listening to the news covering the guilty verdict of Chauvin yesterday, the assistant lead attorney for George Floyd's family, Benjamin Crump, said, you know, justice for Black America is justice for all America. And so I really appreciate you bringing that to us, Eric Richardson, that this is not something that we're addressing on behalf of communities of color. It's something we're addressing on behalf of us as a collective, as humans. However, to do that, we have to focus on the impacts of racism on people of color, but recognize the benefit of addressing these systemic harms. We will all realize those benefits. So thank you, everyone, again, for your comment. I do have a few more things to say about why we would be taking this up as a Board of Health. If I may, Chair, take just another moment. I think it's yes.
When you ever asked me if it was okay without continuing to move on through with your point, please go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to take the time to specifically call out each of our public commenters, because as we've been discussing, we don't often have as many folks weighing in as we'd like. So my comments this morning are the importance of doing this as the Board of Health, because public health, good public health practice relies on population-based approaches to public health issues. So we're going to dig in deep, and we're going to hear from our public health staff more about this. But I just want to frame the conversation about how, you know, when we hear terms or use terms, which we undoubtedly will in the presentation, like marginalized communities or disadvantaged populations or people at risk or the barriers, we have to remember and recognize that we collectively, right, as a society, but particularly for the purposes of this meeting, governments did that. We created, we built the systems and the structures that led to these inequalities and these outcomes. And so it's up to those of us who are in office today to do what we can to dismantle those systems. And we do that through policy change, and we do that through committing to dedicating the resources that are needed to implement those policies. So I just wanted to pull back and frame this as this is why we are the Board of Public Health, and why this is an opportunity for us to address this issue in that capacity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Is there any other commissioner that might want to make it? Yes, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to take a moment to also thank everybody who spoke, but also know and state that we're coming, and it's not lost on me, that we are coming to this resolution and consideration today in a position of privilege. Not only because of my white skin, but also socioeconomic status by virtue of that white skin, and also by the positions in which we hold as commissioners of the county. And we don't necessarily have people of color on our board. I don't want to assume the identity of the personal identity of each person on our board, but it is clear that we don't have a lot of folks of color in positions of power in our local governments. And that is the lens in which I'm coming to this particular resolution, because without that diversity on board, things like this don't always come forward, and they don't always come forward in a way in which actually makes change. So I appreciate our board bringing this forward, Commissioner Farr in particular being willing to shepherd this onto the board's agenda. And I hope we have a great, robust conversation about the resolution today.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there any other commissioner that would like to speak before we begin? Okay. I'd just like to not only thank everyone, but it's just sort of poignant that here we are, we've gone through this process. For some reason, this has never entered a decision point for the Lane County Board of Commissioners or many county boards of commissioners or many cities, at least in this state. And yesterday, a jury found former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin guilty on all counts of murder of George Floyd. I mean, it's a coincidence. I know many who felt this sense of not relief, but emotion that our criminal justice system maybe sometimes can work. And maybe systems can start working and changing. I want to just, one of the things that touched me deeply was Vice President Harris's remarks. Of course, I'm getting a phone call. When she said, which included America has a long history of systemic racism. Black Americans and Black men in particular, for example, have been treated throughout the course of our history as less than human. Black men are fathers, they are brothers and sons and uncles and grandfathers and friends and neighbors. Their lives must be valued in our education systems, our healthcare systems, our housing, our economic systems, our criminal justice systems in our nation. And the vice president then said, full stop. So for us at this moment to be looking at this resolution is very interesting. I would like to say that on the one hand, laws and policies need to be changed. And I think locally this begins a process of institutional change. At least I believe that's the intent. But hearts and minds have to be changed also. So the question becomes, as we look at this resolution, how does that affect real change? How does that then lead a direction for change? I want to share that as we're talking about this is the email I'm getting, and it's at this moment, no matter what we do with this decision, and it's from a friend who happens to be Latinx. She lives in a manufactured home park. My family bought a mobile home and restored it completely and gifted it to my mother and father. The manager of the park denied the application for no reason. When my brother-in-law and sister wanted to rent the space, she denied them access to our own property. We spoke to other tenants of the park, all Latinos, and she is intimidating everyone and constantly giving everyone 30-day notices. An older man in his 70s went missing and no one knows his whereabouts, and the manager has taken over his home, given no explanation. This is impacting over 30 of our Latino neighbors. This is in Springfield right now. So as we're looking at a resolution to define leadership and tone and direction and values, let us always remember in our hearts and minds that actions need to be followed by resolutions for real change to occur. I just wanted to share that, and I hope that's okay. Are there other commissioners that would like to speak before we move on with the agenda? In that case, we are on item 2 of this morning's agenda of our joint meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners and the Lane County Board of Public Health. 2A, Health and Human Services Order and Resolution 21-04-21-01 in the matter of approving and adopting a resolution acknowledging racism as a public health crisis. And we have to guide the discussion now, Dr. Jocelyn Warren, Public Health Manager, and Kachina Inman, Assistant Department Director. If you would, please.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. We appreciate this opportunity to present the draft resolution that was prepared by our Public Health Advisory Committee in collaboration with a great number of community partners. We will discuss that one particularly and give some of the background. And Kachina is also here to provide some larger context for the work that is happening in the department as well as the county. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we'll give some background. We'll look both at local and national contexts. We'll examine both draft resolutions. Public Health will make our recommendation, and then we will discuss briefly the next steps. Before we start, we wanted to give a definition of racism. This definition comes from Dr. Kamara Phyllis-Jones. She is at the forefront of the research on racism and its impacts on communities and individuals, and does a beautiful job in using allegory and other stories to illustrate the impact of racism on people's lives. We're going to use her definition, so I'll read it aloud here. Racism is a system of structuring opportunity and assigning value based on the social interpretation of how one looks, which is what we call race. That unfairly disadvantages some individuals and communities, unfairly advantages other individuals and communities, and saps the strength of the whole society through the waste of human resources. Next slide, please. I couldn't find any photos from our Lane Equity Coalition's meeting in which we first discussed the 2017 Health Equity Report, but this is the flyer from that, just as a way to kind of illustrate that this work has been really part of some community work for some time now. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit about the local background. So Public Health published its first equity report in late 2017 and presented that to the board. One thing I want to mention about the equity report is that we do rely on what we were using at the time was existing data, usually large data sets that are often insufficient for describing what is happening locally on the ground because of the small numbers, then the inability to make statistical inferences from those types of data sets. So we did what we could with what we had, but there is definitely a lot of opportunity to do much better in describing the experiences here locally of our BIPOC communities. At the direction of the board in March of 2018, we had that presentation to the Lane Equity Coalition in which many community members came together and brainstormed ideas about how to eliminate health disparities in our community and what their experiences had been. Taking all of that information, the Public Health Advisory Committee and members of the Equity and Access Advisory Board came together as a small group to review all of those ideas and sift through that information and coalesce it into a set of recommendations based on those small group discussions that the board then endorsed in June of 2018. Following that, and at that point, there was some work that was assigned to the Equity and Access Board, and Mo Young went forward with the equity plan and did a lot of work in that area. So I know you heard about the equity plan yesterday, so I won't focus on that, but kind of keep focused on what the Public Health Advisory Committee did as a representative here for them. So that work group, which is called Racism and Equity, met again in 2020 several times to develop a resolution declaring racism a public health crisis. And they forwarded that resolution to the board in March of 2021. Next slide, please. Now, this is just very high level about the national background. At the same time, of course, we all know about the Derek Chauvin trial and the verdicts that were released yesterday, which is certainly top of mind for many of us and a bright spot, at least, maybe one step toward a better future, we've also seen that the COVID-19 pandemic has illuminated and exacerbated a lot of the existing health disparities that we've noted in earlier reports. Across the country, I think was mentioned earlier, about 200 racism declarations have been made across the country, including about 76 at the county level. Those are kind of the inventory of those are maintained on the American Public Health Association website. If you're interested, we have that link at the end of the presentation. And finally, very recently, the CDC calls racism a serious public health threat. That was in early April. Next slide, please. Thank you. Dr. Rochelle Walensky, who is the CDC director, said that racism is a serious public health threat that directly affects the well-being of millions of Americans. As a result, it affects the health of our entire nation. Racism is not just the discrimination against one group based on the color of their skin or their race or ethnicity, but the structural barriers that impact racial and ethnic groups differently to influence where a person lives, where they work, where their children play, and where they worship and gather in community. These social determinants of health have lifelong negative effects on the mental and physical health of individuals in communities of color. Over generations, these structural inequities have resulted in stark racial and ethnic health disparities that are severe, far-reaching, and unacceptable. Next slide. So why a declaration? I think acknowledging, and the board has been very active in acknowledging Black Lives Matter and in some of the impacts of racism. A formal declaration is being brought today because we want to highlight that morbidity and mortality among Black and Hispanic people in the COVID-19 pandemic is higher than it is for white people. So-called race doesn't put people at higher risk though, racism does. People of color are more exposed and less protected. Once infected in COVID-19, more likely they are to die because of a greater burden of chronic diseases from living in disinvested communities with poor food and transportation options, more pollution, and less access to healthcare. When we talk about race, when we talk about the data and why people are at greater risk, we're talking about racism, and that is the fundamental cause of racial disparities. Naming racism then is the first step to eliminating health disparities. So we have two declarations before the board. They have a lot of overlap. They are very, very similar. I want to acknowledge that the declaration brought to Vice Chair Farr is excellent as well. So that one is, I don't know a lot of the background of that one, but I certainly appreciate the sincere effort and recommendations that are included in it. I'm more familiar with the version that has come from the Public Health Advisory Committee, as that has been developed over the course of about a year and a half. And it's really an extension of the community equity work that's been going on for some time in these advisory boards. What I would like to do now is to read the draft here. This is the one that we are recommending. Whereas throughout our nation's history, slavery, racism, and racial injustice have led to deepening racial disparities across all sectors and have had lasting negative consequences for Lane County. And whereas the racist history of Oregon in particular, including the presence of the Black Exclusion Clause in the state's constitution, has had lasting negative consequences for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or BIPOC communities of the state and Lane County. And whereas Lane County has recognized that there is a systemic and prolific nature to racism built in the foundation of the United States. And as such, these actions go on without recognition and effective adjudication. And whereas racism has deep and harmful impacts that unfairly disadvantage members of the BIPOC communities and unfairly advantage people who identify as white. And whereas racism and discrimination are linked to adverse health outcomes, and whereas members of the BIPOC communities living in Lane County are likely to experience higher rates of chronic disease, COVID-19 infection and hospitalization, and poverty, as well as lower rates of high school graduation and lower life expectancy. And whereas the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on Lane County BIPOC communities is a present day demonstration of the systemic racism in institutions and systems And whereas it is the mission of Lane County Public Health to promote and protect the long-term health and well-being of individuals, families, and our community, and the Lane County Board of Health has committed to addressing racial equity and health disparities in all forms and at all levels. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Lane County Board of Health declares that racism is a public health crisis, and be it further resolved that the Lane County Board of Health will, 1, promote active and authentic engagement with BIPOC communities on issues of race, ethnicity, and health. 2, use an equity lens to form policy recommendations that will demonstrably improve health outcomes in Lane County related to race and ethnicity. 3, obtain and use more meaningful data in order to better tell the story of Lane County's BIPOC communities. 4, review and regularly evaluate the county's equity and diversity requirements for employees with the goal of ensuring that training is mandatory, comprehensive, relevant, and incorporated into professional development evaluations. In addition, highly encouraging training for all those who represent the county in any capacity. 5, urge other institutions, organizations, and governmental bodies to declare racism as a public health crisis and to adopt strategies to reduce the long-term impact of systemic racism. 6, allocate resources to effectively implement these actions. And 7, provide biannual updates on these actions at the Board of Health meetings. Next slide, please. The next steps after naming racism, as described by Dr. Jones, are to understand the local mechanisms and impacts of racism, especially through community conversations, and then to take actions to dismantle racism, to focus areas identified by leadership, community conversations. Next step, I'll let Katrina Inman take it on from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Good morning, commissioners. A key piece of this is not just the declaration, but what happens in response to that declaration and the action that we all have to take at all levels. And Jocelyn already began to articulate this, but the community, to start with the community, to listen to the community, to authentically engage with the community, to partner, not to do to, not to do for, but to do with. And that should be the centering of how we take action in response to our racial equity work. And I also want to lift up a couple of things that you already are aware of or is coming in the near future. At Health and Human Services, we just completed our strategic plan. We have not yet shared that with all of you, and we look forward to the time in the near future when we will be able to do that. But racial equity is deeply embedded in our strategic plan. We heard that from our community and we heard that from our staff as an area that we need to prioritize. And so there will be accountability in our strategic plan to also help move this forward. And then you all are deeply aware of our racial equity plan, and we got a wonderful update from Mo Young yesterday. Again, looking at all the layers in which we have that accountability and we take action. And that is one of the ways in which we can do that. And then our community health improvement plan. Jocelyn will be coming to you next week with updates on the community health improvement plan, which was developed by our community for our community. And you again will see a deep commitment to furthering our racial equity work. So again, in summary, just it takes all of us, and it takes not just words, but our actions. And so we're here today also from the accountability standpoint, and that these are all the places that we hope to help move and further this critical work for our community.
Those are a few resources available. I realize I did not put the map of the American Public Health Association up there, so I can make that available to anyone who's interested. But these are other resources available. Dr. Jones' excellent article on confronting institutionalized racism, and then the resources that the CDC has pulled together as part of their new initiative for racism and health that are available on their website. And Chair, that concludes our presentation.
Thank you very, very much. Are there questions or comments for either Dr. Warren or Ms. Inman? Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. Just briefly, I think Dr. Warren and Ms. Inman are aware of this, but I just wanted to add for context that in addition to the 76 counties and many municipalities, very specifically Oregon State Legislature is hearing House Bill 2337. I believe actually today or tomorrow there's a hearing. So our state legislature is also looking at declaring racism a public health threat statewide.
Thank you, Commissioner. Was that it for this round? Okay. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie, and Dr. Warren and Ms. Inman, thank you very much for the presentation. Very well put together, very well assembled, and very clear and concise. Chair Bernie, since my name was mentioned, I'm going to say this. This isn't from me by any stretch of the imagination. This is from the entire community, Dr. Warren. And I just happen to be the person who mentioned it, perhaps at a critical time. But Chair Bernie, you mentioned earlier in our meeting today that the exquisite timing of this, in conjunction with what is happening nationally, the powerful conversation regarding yesterday's verdicts and what led up to yesterday's verdicts, it really is critical that we look at this not as a resolution to look at and put on the shelf, as we've said in the past, but a resolution to really form a base of action for future for this board and for future boards. Additionally, Dr. Warren, you mentioned a second resolution that you have provided the text of in our packet, and anyone watching at home can click view here and see the entire text of that resolution. If you look at that resolution, it's a little bit different in its wording than the resolution that's before us as the first resolution, the one from the Public Health Advisory Board. The resolution is longer and it really prescribes more specific and definite actions. I believe that second resolution, if we look at that and keep it close at hand, it gives us a really good outline frame for a work plan to integrate with work plans that we're already getting in place for the future, Dr. Warren. That it really gives specific actions, and it comes deeply from within the community. It was presented to me, not only to me, once again, Dr. Warren, this wasn't only to me, you know that. Everybody here knows that it's not only to me, it's to everybody. And I just happen to be the one that spoke first. That's just a matter of timing is all that was. But if we look at that resolution, a lot of work went into that second resolution. And I hope that we can, look at the words, listen to the words, and really form work plans from that. The other thing that I will say is that, every one of us here, both watching and in this meeting, have experienced racism. Eric Richardson says racism affects white people. Of course it does. It creates a negative environment that we all live within, and negative is not even close to powerful enough of a word. A little over 4 years ago, my Latina daughter-in-law was walking down Fifth Avenue, I've told this story before, with our grandbabies. Grandbaby only had one there at the time, and a group of young men said they were going to throw her back over the wall. That, of course, stuck a dagger in my heart, but it really, in a way, added salience to the argument when it comes right into your home, which Commissioner Buck, you said we're here from a position of privilege. We're white. We have really, probably none of us have much racism that have affected us directly in the past. But as we had salience to the discussion, we begin to see it through other sets of eyes that it's really difficult to see through. Yolanda experienced a mental anguish from that event that has lasted since that event. That is a health crisis for that one individual alone that I'm citing an example of. And that is echoed throughout the entire community. Every time we experience racism, it is a health crisis. And we have actual delineation of public health, physical health, and mental health of discrimination that's taken place, not only in our community, but broadly. So this is an opportunity, once again, Chair, but I'm not going to pontificate because everybody has a lot to say about this. Everybody has personal experience. I just happen to be one with a little bit of personal experience. that this is a base for our actions for the future. And I want to thank the board. I don't need to thank you. You know, you're not doing this for me. We're doing it as the right thing. So no thanks to the board, not at all, by any stretch of the imagination. We're just doing it. Eric Richardson said this is long overdue. Most certainly it is. Maybe hundreds of years overdue. But you know, once again, we all have racism. My grandchildren, I have 3 biological grandchildren. 2 of my grandchildren have, both of their grandfathers are immigrants. I'm an immigrant, and Dionisio Gomez was an immigrant. He came from Mexico, I came from England, to a very different kind of reception for an immigrant. Dionisio died in the fields after being sprayed, and he died very young of cancer. So I came amid welcome arms and hoopla in a small community of Tillamook where the Beatles had preceded me. I came from England. So we have different experiences, but really we need to focus all of our experiences on what we can do for the future. I'm sorry, I took a long time to say what should have been just a few words, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Are there any other commissioners that would like to make a comment, statement, ask the doctor a question? Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. First, I want to truly appreciate Dr. Warren for having that definition of racism. It was something I specifically asked for. And I do appreciate and I do support that definition. It's probably one of the better ones I've read. And it is interesting because, you know, it talks about how it saps the strength of the whole society through the waste of human resources. And it's something I truly believe in. It does. But, you know, that said, I'm still concerned about moving forward with this, and I'll discuss it further once we have a motion on the floor. I just have a couple questions about some of the therefores. Mr. Moker-Heisky, you may even want to come in to answer some of these things. Are we not using an equity lens to form policy recommendations right now? Therefore, be it further resolved, number 2.
Kachina, I saw your hand up, but anyone is more than welcome to respond, so please.
I'll let Steve start. I'm happy to jump in on the equity lens piece too, if helpful.
Yeah, why don't you take that, Kachina?
Okay, so as you know, we're in the early stages of our equity lens development. We do have a draft toolkit, and we are starting to utilize that in specific areas that were highlighted and selected by our department directors. And it's getting out. People are interested, they're excited, and they're embracing it, which is very exciting for our work as a community. But it's not being utilized everywhere yet. We're very much in the pilot stage.
Yeah, but I realize we're in the pilot stage. We had an update on Equity 2.0 yesterday. And it's something work we've already started, but I'm kind of wondering, is that not going to happen with or without this declaration?
I'll let Steve go. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's going to happen. I don't know that these are mutually exclusive issues. So yes, the rollout of our equity lens is happening. As Kachina said, we're in the pilot phase. We have a long way to go. There is a lot of excitement and anticipation, and we're trying to really pace ourselves to make sure that we do it right, because doing it right means embedding it in everything that we do and helping everyone in our organization and everyone really is a decision maker at some point in their job. So there's a long way to go on that front. I don't think that the intent, and I'll let Dr. Warren and Kachina speak to this as well, but I don't think the intent of the resolution is to supersede that work, but rather to reinforce it.
As I look at this resolution, items 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 and even 7, because we have our 2.0 going on, we're doing all that activity now and plan to continue to do it. So we're not doing anything. The only thing new we're adding with this resolution is urging other institutions to make a declaration. Am I incorrect that we're not doing everything in 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7? And had planned to do that? I mean, are we not actively trying to engage with these communities?
Well, if you're asking, I can attempt to respond to that. I think that's true in some regards. I will say, for example, I'm looking at 3, obtain and use more meaningful data in order. I think most of us feel as though at the staff level, we have not accomplished these things, and we're not doing them at the level that ultimately we need to. So the number 3 is a good example of that. Our proposed budget will have, I think, some investments that will seek to accomplish additional progress in these areas. So yeah, and again, I'd welcome Dr. Warren and Kachina to add to that, but I think it is true that many of these things we are in process. They're not necessarily new initiatives. They are things that we have been committed to, are committed to, but I would say have not fully achieved or invested at the level that we need to achieve as of yet.
Just being on the co-chair of PSCC, I know that we are currently having a very large discussion about meaningful data and data collection in the criminal justice system in Lane County, and trying to get that established. I point this out because, we in September of 2019 passed a declaration declaring a homeless emergency. And at that time, I voted against that declaration because it really wasn't going to do anything other than signal our virtue around that. And I think this is doing some very similar work, and it bothers me because it kind of gets back to a lot of other declarations that have been done in various political movements, and some of them that haven't turned out so well, such as the war on drugs or the war on terrorism. When you see these sweeping declarations from on high that we're going to have a war on poverty, a war on drugs, a war on terrorism, we're going to declare homelessness emergency, we're going to declare this a crisis. I sometimes think that some rather poor policies sometimes come out of that rather than good policy. And if we're already doing all the work that's called for in this, I see this almost as an unnecessary piece of virtue signaling. But I do really appreciate the definition that was provided, because I can fully support that definition.
Thank you, Commissioner. Did anyone want to respond before I call on Commissioner Trieger from staff?
Chair, if I may, I think perhaps the difference, or what's added here, and granted this resolution was being developed at the same time that some of these other initiatives were being developed, so there is some parallel work which explains some of why these things may already be sort of in the developmental process. I think the other thing that's really important though here is we've heard from a number of our community members how important it is to signal the commitment, and to have that actually as a part of the declaration is really meaningful to our community. And I think that this piece of having it in writing and in a declaration is a method for holding us accountable for achieving these things. If it's here and it's in a therefore and it's a shall, there is a piece that says, yeah, we are going to do this, and you can bring this back. We have to make it sustainable over time, and we have to be held accountable for it.
Now, I would like to add, one more piece.
No, go, Kachina, go ahead. And
okay, So I want to take the first example that Commissioner Bozovich alluded to, promote active and authentic engagement with BIPOC communities on issues of race, ethnicity, and health. And I want to give an example of that. Yes, we are doing some of that. You are absolutely right. And we need to do better. So right now at Health and Human Services, we are looking critically at our advisory boards. Who's on our advisory boards? Who's not on our advisory boards? Why are they not on our advisory boards? And really digging into how do we meet the community where they're at? How do we go to their communities to listen, to engage, to gain that respect and that relationship so we can serve them in more meaningful ways? So this is a place where I think we have huge opportunity to grow and to learn and to develop. And I could run through examples, I think, on all 7 of these areas where we're starting. And from my perspective, this is our forever work, right? This is our work that we slowly chip away at and we make progress in ways that we can. And the declaration is a way to deepen and further that commitment and ultimately put it into action.
Thank you very much, Katina. And Commissioner Bozovich, Commissioner Trieger did have her hand up for a while, so I do need to call on her. Commissioner Trieger?
Thank you, Chair. I have a question of clarification. I think this is for our administrator, and it gets to perhaps some of what Commissioner Bozovich is expressing. To me, what is really important about this is that we are addressing racism as a public health crisis, and we are doing this gavelled in as the Board of Health. And that's unique relative to some of these other declarations and resolutions that we've made. And it's important because, as I said at the top of the meeting, and as this board before I joined it has recognized, you can't legislate people's personal biases and behaviors, and we have a responsibility as the Board of Health to create community conditions and environments that support that culture change. As Chair Burney talked about at the top of the meeting, hearts and minds have to change. Policy shapes hearts and minds, people's hearts and minds shape who's in office and therefore the policies we pass. But I think it's uniquely important to recognize our role and our authority and our responsibility as the Board of Public Health, and that is what we're hearing this in, and that is what this resolution is being passed, and that's the accountability that will hold to these therefores. And so I'm curious from our administrator, I think if you could share with me if some of these other declarations that Commissioner Bozovich has named, those have not been enacted under our authority as the Board of Health. Is that right?
I don't believe so. I'm thinking specifically about the homelessness as a crisis. I can't remember. I don't know that we did it as a public health crisis. I just, off the top of my head, I would need to look at that. I don't believe that it was. And I think the sentiment here from the board and what Dr. Warren and Katina shared is true. There's a bit of a mixing here between the role of the board, the governing body, you all, the 5 of you are the governing body for the organization, and the messages that you send to the community by taking certain actions, right? So Dr. Warren alluded to that piece. That's a role that, staff can't do those things, right? We have to take the direction of the board. The board really sets the direction and the policy. And so from that standpoint, in terms of making a statement, there's value. And then wrapped into this action are these specific things that we've identified that, yes, we have been doing. Many of them we continue to do. I guess I look at it similar to our strategic plan, right? We don't have to have a strategic plan. We can just go do a bunch of stuff. Yeah, and we'll do some good stuff, but calling it out, right? Identifying it specifically and saying, here are the things that we're committed to. It sends a message not only to folks in the community, but also to our organization about what our focus is and the things that we're going to be committed to. So that was a little bit further than your question asked, Commissioner, but I just wanted to share that reflection as well. So I don't believe that the prior actions were done under the Board of Health, but I can look into that.
So that answer was, I don't think so, but I'll check it out. I'm sorry. Yeah. Commissioner Trieger, were you through?
For the time being, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Bozovich, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to quickly kind of respond to both staff and the administrator's comments. A strategic plan is where this belongs. And that's where the board votes to adopt it and shows our support for this. A declaration is just a declaration. Whether it's done as the board, which that was where we did our homeless emergency. We made that as from the Board of Commissioners. It wasn't the Board of Health. Commissioner Trieger's right, but I don't know what the, we're both. And it does, that's, whether we do it as Board of Health or the board, we're still declaring something. What we need to do is have it be part of our strategic plan. The work we're doing under the PSCC is in the PSC's work plan, which is the PSCC votes to adopt that plan. It's basically the strategic plan, annual strategic plan for the PSCC. We have a strategic plan for the county. In fact, Kachina made reference to the upcoming submittal to the board of H&HS's strategic plan. Each department has strategic plans. That's where this work should be happening, is in our strategic planning. We have done so much with this county utilizing strategic planning. And the board leads that effort and adopts the strategic plan. That's where I see we should be doing this work and memorializing these things. Making a declaration is all about just trying to signal, that we've made a declaration. And I think some of it is even harmful in some ways. But I'll let that go. As you can tell, I'm probably going to vote against this because I do feel it's just a virtue signaling exercise. We should be doing this work in our strategic planning.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Warren, you had up earlier in the slides, the slide that said why a declaration. And I thought that was really important for everybody to see. You had also added the language of even within the pandemic. However, it was well stated even without the pandemic as a context in which to view the reasons why a declaration is important. When we did the declaration on homelessness, the reaction I received from the community afterward was actually pretty profound. Many folks thought that the board didn't acknowledge it was an issue. And that was part of the reasons why we may not be doing as much as they wanted us to. However, when they knew that we actually acknowledged it, cared about it, shared that we wanted to work on it, it made a significant impact on what they thought the board was working on. Declarations like this are very meaningful to our community. They're also backup to when we take action and people wonder why we're taking that action. We're taking this action because we declared that this is an issue and we want to work on it, whatever that issue may be and whatever we're advocating on. If for some reason you had to do something as a governmental entity, you look back on these things and state, well, these are the reasons why we are moving forward in these particular directions. And it makes sense to have an issue like this come up, a declaration of this magnitude come up under the auspices of public health. We are, yes, in the midst of a pandemic, but there have been issues, systemic issues like this happening for as long as our country has existed. It's about time we acknowledge these things, as Eric Richardson said. These are obvious issues for so many people in our community. Stating the words in public for everybody to hear is important, and that is what leadership does. As good leaders, this declaration is important to our community and sets the tone for where we as a county want to lend our energy and resources. We have lots of issues on our plate. This, we know, is highly important, and there's a lot of work coming out of this administration on racial justice. We are acknowledging that by acknowledging this declaration. I am in very much support, as you can probably tell, but to not say anything at all about this subject also makes a statement, and not one that I want to make. I want to be on the forefront of this. I want Lane County to be on the forefront of this, because this is the right thing to do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Farr had his hand up.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. I'm anxious to hear your words also, but I'll insert a few more here. Listening to Commissioner Bozovich, Commissioner Bozovich, you're exactly right. Declarations can absolutely be what you call as a signal of virtue, indeed, if that is the case, then we have no business passing this resolution, passing this declaration. But that's not what I expect or intend this to be. I intend this to be much unlike the one that was passed on July 4th, 1776. A declaration on that date would have been just hollow words without the action and the work plan that took place after that in declaring independence from Great Britain. Clearly a different situation, and clearly a little bit of a mixed message, but declarations are only worth their words if they're acted upon. And we're talking about work plans, we're talking about ongoing work, and we're talking about not being mutually exclusive from existing work plans, that this should weave into existing work plans and help to make them more robust, more salient, and more actionable. So I appreciate your words, Commissioner Bozovich, and I do agree with you. Declarations are just a signal of virtue unless there's teeth involved.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Are there any other, before I make my inputs, are there any other commissioners that would like to add anything to this conversation at this point? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, this is sparking a thought for me for when we do get to our strategic planning. This could be a turning point for us as an organization and the culture of how we make decisions and how we put those plans forward. And it could very well be useful, since we exist to serve a community, to incorporate what we've heard from community into our strategic plan in a new way. And that is an inventory, perhaps, of our resolutions, our declarations, and the strategic plans of all the different divisions and departments actually become the fodder for our strategic plan rather than the other way around. I think that would make a lot of sense, and it would ensure that our strategic plan actually aligns with the input of the constituents that we're here to serve. So that's just a sort of flipping a little bit. If Commissioner Bozovich's primary concern is what comes first, that's something that we could consider, and then this important right side of history resolution and declaration could be incorporated into a new way of approaching our strategic planning. Thank you.
Thank you. First, and I may end up with questions, I want to thank Dr. Warren and Ms. Inman and even Mr. Mokraheisky in trying to drill through our heads the intent and importance of this. I also want to thank, I think we had real interesting bookends. By the way, I think civil discussion and debate is what democracy is all about. And I think that's what this board is embodying. I think that Commissioner Bozovic articulated very well a concern I shared, that declarations void of action not only are meaningless, but sometimes, Commissioner, I'm extrapolating, but sometimes can make people think they've done something when they really haven't actually done anything. And I think Commissioner Buck equally articulated the other side of that, which has to do with really the utility in leadership of listening, acknowledging, and having the political will to make a commitment that something is important. And I hope that both of you will forgive me if I assessed in any way. Because I was grappling with this, and that's the reason why I mentioned and read a bit of a text from one of my Latinx constituents who's dealing with, I think, racism of hearts and minds, not of public policies. And that's, by the way, what I'm dealing with, when we're not meeting right now this week, is looking at the legalities and illegalities of what's going on there and getting some teeth into enforcement. Where I've come down on this, first off, is that my worldview, because we all bring all our life experiences to the table in these roles as elected officials. And my critical perspective is that some of the most overarching problems affecting our globe are war, racism, poverty, and environmental sustainability. I mean, just be very, very clear for me, at least. I'm only speaking for myself. I did my research, and Dr. Warren, if I'm not mistaken, did I read an article that you wrote 7 years ago? Was that you? As one of the authors, talking about medical mistrust, perceived discrimination, and satisfaction with healthcare among young adult rural Latinos. Was that you? It's pretty impressive, doctor. So what that and other thing tell me is that what I see this as an issue that's been bubbling up from the bottom up, from the constituents we serve up to this body, even from staff work to community work, that ended up, in my understanding, is 2 different resolutions that were very compatible with one another. It's also my sense, and Kachina, Dr. Warren, Jocelyn, my sense is you want this resolution to pass very much. Is that correct? I see Kachina shaking her head. I don't hear or see Dr. Warren.
Absolutely, yes. Our strong recommendation is adoption of the version presented by the Public Health Advisory Committee.
And tell me why, from not just systemically, but from your hearts, why you want this so much to be a resolution of this County Board of Commissioners.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. I do believe that it is really fundamentally important for leadership to take a strong stand on this and for it to be seen and acknowledged. And it is true that much of our work, as Commissioner Buck has mentioned, is not often very visible to the community. So despite our best efforts, there remain, and our best efforts, let me be clear, are still pretty limited. There's quite a lot more to do. We have a lot of work to do. And I also know that this means, and we heard from a number of community members in the beginning of the meeting about how important this is. And I think that acknowledging as well that this is really important to our community is important, that we have this strong signal from leadership on which to base the continuing efforts that we can continue to build out. It really goes, I think, a long way towards establishing greater trust with government, which has been an issue for some time. So that to me is why I think it is such an important concept. And not an end, obviously, not an end, just a beginning.
Did you want to add to that, Kachina, or no?
Thank you, Chair. I think Jocelyn said it most beautifully, and I would second everything she said. But, you know, as I read through these words on the declaration, they're powerful. Our community needs to hear them, right? And then absolutely, this is foundational, the critical first step, right, that we heard from our public comment this morning, and then our action follows. So yes, I am in full support of moving this declaration forward too. Thank you.
Thank you. And to me, that's important because while we are the elected and policy body, you both have given your hearts and souls and professions and careers to this subject of public health. And you're telling us that racism is a public health crisis in a moment when it seems like this country and local bodies are finally willing to hear that. I also want to say, if I may, that that Commissioner Vozovich, you mentioned the war on poverty, and I was just reflecting on that because we may agree, we may disagree. I think some really good policies came out of Johnson's war on poverty. I then worked in the Carter administration as it related to providing support to then community action agencies that existed in virtually every community as anti-poverty groups in the country, and community development corporations, which were in the 42 of the most significant ones. I know we have things called that in Lane County. None were in Lane County. They were then in ghettos, barrios, and reservations across the country. And I think to friends of mine that I directly worked with, Horace Orr, African-American, the head of the Seminole Employment and Economic Development Corporation in Seminole County, which had health clinics for his people that were not receiving health from some of the private clinics. Ruby Duncan, who was the executive director of Operation Life Community Development Corporation in West Las Vegas, with the strong African-American service worker population that migrated from the railroads. She led in the late 60s a welfare mothers strike that closed down the Las Vegas Strip as they were being denied their payments. And these are personal friends. Henry Mestry, who was the executive director of the Spanish-speaking Unity Council in Oakland, California. Victor Merced, interestingly, some people in Oregon know Victor Merced as the head of the Oregon Housing and Community Services Agency during the Kitzhaber administration. I knew him in the late 70s as the head of the Bronx Community Development Corporation in South Bronx. I could go on, but my point is this. I will be voting to support this, understanding the reservations that one of our commissioners has made. I think it is time for our community and this body to articulate and develop the political will to address this situation systemically. So those are my comments. And I thank you, Katrina and Jocelyn, for bringing this to our attention. Are there any other comments before someone wants to make a motion? Does the chair hear a motion? Commissioner Farr.
I will cede to any other commissioner who would like to make the motion.
I'd be honored to second
Thank
the motion if you'd like to make it Vice Chair as the representative from the Public Health Advisory who brought this to us.
Thank you, Commissioner. Then Chair Bruni, I would like to make a motion to approve the order and resolution 2104-21, which is the declaration of, in the matter of approving and adopting a resolution acknowledging racism as a public health crisis as presented by the Public Health Advisory Committee and contained in today's agenda item. That's a bit clumsy. Can someone reword that for me a little bit?
Commissioner Trieger, do I hear you seconding that?
I will second, clumsy or not.
Commissioner Farr has moved and Commissioner Trieger has seconded order and resolution 21-04-21-01. in the matter of approving and adopting a resolution acknowledging racism as a public health crisis. Does anyone wish to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of order and resolution 21-04-21-01, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Nay, sorry. That's good.
I thought that was coming, but I didn't know how much time it needed to get out. Let the records show that order and resolution 21-04-21-01 in the matter of approving and adopting the resolution acknowledging racism as a public health crisis has been approved. 4 commissioners voting aye and Commissioner Bozovich voting nay, and it will be my honor to be able to sign that motion. It is now 10:30. I am now going to adjourn the joint meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners and the Lane County Board of Public Health. The Board of Commissioners shall reconvene in executive session. Diana, would you read us in, and then we will reconvene at 11 a.m.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. I will read you in now. The Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602D, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. The board reserves the right to come back into public session should the need arise.
Thank you very much. We are adjourned. See you at 11.